up, mediums? Welcome to The Writer's Journey. I'm your host, Lauren Moore, and with me is the hot Kayleen Williams. We're two authors on a journey to learn more about writing with you, the audience, so thank you for joining us. This episode is brought to you by Echoes of Valor, written by our very own Josh Hayes. And tonight we're talking about pacing and the saggy middle. Our guest is the New York Times best-selling author of the Aeon 14 science fiction series, with fresh books coming out each week, and a nonfiction book for authors, Help, My Facebook Ads Suck, which is the start of a series of author business books coming out in 2020. No stranger to the show, our guest was here back in February to talk about launch strategies and has now returned to help us look at pacing and tightening up the saggy middle of our plots. Mal Cooper, welcome back to the show.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Good, so excited to have you on. We've been plotting and planning this for like a month.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were going to do it sometime in the summer, and I was traveling or something like that, and we had to reschedule, and now here we are.
Which is the perfect night because we all get to look fabulous.
Totally.
So many book conferences. I've been following you on Instagram and seeing all of your adventures down to Florida and Boston. And were you in New York?
I've done Dallas, Atlanta, 3 trips to Florida, Portland, and Seattle, and Boston as well. So yeah, I've done quite a few this year. I worked it out, and I've actually been away from home 3 solid months worth this year, going to conferences and events. So it's been a lot.
That's dedication, man. That is super dedication.
Yeah.
And where are the most rabid book fans that you've seen in all of America, all of your travels?
Well, a lot of the stuff I do, they're author conventions, actually. But I did Boston Comic Con, and that actually was really good. It's your table is $750 at Boston Comic Con, and I made my money back.
Oh wow, nice.
Which is pretty neat because I'm not like a super well known author. Like these people are walking around looking for the latest comics by actual famous people, and I still sold enough books to pay for it. And then with read through, it actually worked out really well. So that was good.
Now, explain to our audience what you're wearing, because we have a lot of podcast audience who cannot appreciate with their eyes what you're wearing. So they're going to have to appreciate
the
it with
glory.
Yeah. So this is it's a Day of the Dead La Katrina costume, and so it's a skeleton cat suit, which you can't see, I guess, the whole thing, but and then I'm wearing this corset over top. And I wasn't going to wear the corset because the cat suit is really cool looking, but then it's about this not having a saggy middle. So I figured at some point I was going to have slouching and have a saggy middle. So I got to, keep it all tucked in. And then this is my first time ever trying to do makeup like this today. I watched a bunch of tutorials and I did it. And I'm actually really happy with how it turned out. So especially because I've got some pretty fancy makeup I'm going to be doing for the for 20 books in Vegas. So this was some good practice for me.
Yeah. So you are not only going to tell us about how to cut the saggy middle out of our plot, but you're demonstrating it in your look.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. So when you're writing, if you wear a corset, it's really going to help you.
Force you to have good posture. Look, here's good posture me, and here's me by the end of the show.
I refer to this as my diet as well. If you're wearing a corset, you get full a lot faster. So, if you're looking to combat a little bit of that snacking that goes on while you're writing, it's an option as well.
That does work.
Yeah.
Now,
your doctor may not recommend this as a good way to diet, but hey,
don't break ribs trying to diet.
No, don't do that. Now, speaking of breaking ribs, trying to work so hard, another awkward segue. Back in February, you said you publish books like every Thursday?
Just about. I mean, I actually slowed down a little bit this year. This whole changing genders, as some people might have noticed. I used to be Michael Cooper, and now I'm Mallory Cooper. That takes up a lot of headspace, as it turns out. So we're probably going to end the year only doing about 26 to 30 books. Whereas last year we did 44. So last year there was a book almost every Thursday. And if it wasn't a full novel, then we would have a short story or an anthology or something like that would be coming out. This year we've actually gone like sometimes as many as 3 Thursdays in a row without a book coming out. But but we're ramping it back up again to be at least 3 books a month going forward again. So
that's insane.
Keeps it busy.
So my question is, does plot structure come in to help you meet these book production goals, whether it's every 3 weeks or every 2 weeks, every week? Does your understanding of plot help you to meet those goals?
I think like we don't really have anything that I would say is like a fixed way that the books are written, because that would end up getting really boring. But once you've written a lot of books, you really start to get an idea for the things that you have to have and the things that you don't want to have in your book. Like I listen to a lot of authors and they talk about deleting parts of their books. And that's not a thing that we do. When we write a book, pretty much every word you write goes in. Other than, of course, anything gets edited. I think the most I've ever cut out of a book since my third book has been maybe 5,000 words. And then I released that as a separate short story because I hate wasting words. So there is a lot of thought that goes into the pacing and understanding, the things you want to have and the things you don't want to have, so that every word that you're writing is actually, something that ends up out in the book. You're not wasting time.
So you want like the first draft to be the final draft. That must mean there's a lot of conceptualizing that's going in ahead of time. Oh, you said earlier that there are things you do want your book. What are some of those things you do want your book, and then what would you want out?
Well, I think some of the things like I guess like this is a little bit less of a plotting thing and more of just a structure thing. Is when you write a story, and every time you enter into a scene, you have to think about it almost like you're producing a movie. You have to think like, okay, the camera comes into the room and it pans around a little bit to maybe show you where you are, or maybe it approaches the building from the outside. Like if you actually watch TV, they do things. They do establishing shots outside, and then they might show like an interior shot of like a wide interior shot, and then they show a closer shot of one of the characters. And when you're writing a book, you want to do the same sort of thing. And the reason why is that if you have a conversation going on in a room with 3 or 4 people, you have to introduce them all right away. You can't just suddenly have like John appear halfway through the chapter and be like, oh, you just had to know he was sitting there the whole time, And those are a lot of the kinds of mistakes that will cause people to have books that are jumpy or weird, or that have to have a lot of rewriting, because they're like, oh crap, I forgot to actually do my establishing paragraphs at the beginning of this chapter to let everybody know who's there. So that's one of the ways that we keep from a lot of churn and a lot of having to rewrite things. And the other way really is thinking, sort of my mantra is, if it's boring for you to write it, it's probably going to be boring for the readers to read it. So it's a good way to, as you're writing, be like, wow, this is really dull. I'm barely interested in what I'm writing right now. And then to stop and ask yourself some questions right away about what you can do to make that better. But I won't jump ahead, because I think we're talking about some of those tips and tricks later. But it's a lot of identifying when things are boring and not to do them. And then the other big thing is I believe in writing a lot of climaxes in your books. I think that a book should probably have between 6 and 7 climaxes, or 5 and 7 climaxes at least. And I don't know, am I jumping ahead? I base all of this on Raiders of the Lost Ark. When I first started writing books, I thought about some of my favorite movies, and Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of my favorite movies. And that movie is climax after climax after climax after climax. It has these short connecting scenes between each one. So you start out with sort of the intro, sort of setting the scene with Indy going into the jungle, and then the climax, stealing the idol, having the ball chase him, and then Belloc steals the idol from him. Then you have a short connecting scene to resolve some of that stuff, and then to open up the next part of the plot. And then you have Marion and her climax with the Nazis, and it just does this over and over again. And it even does things like it has a major second act climax. In like the second act climax in Raiders of the Lost Ark, when they find the Ark, and he has the big fight with the guy by the flying wing, and they're fighting and everything like that. And there's the snakes. Like there's so many, like actually the snake scene, and then the big fight. Like both of those things are the size of what climaxes you would see in other movies. And that's just the second act climax that movie has. So, pardon me. I thought about that a lot. I thought that what they did in that movie is they just took out all the boring parts, and they didn't put them in at all. And they just used these connecting scenes where the characters are reflecting on things that happened, and they do it in a way that it describes more about the characters. Like when Indy and Marion are on the boat, when she's tending to his wounds, you learn a lot about the characters and the way they bicker and banter with each other in that one scene. You learn a lot about them. It closes up a bunch of things that have happened. And then they add humor too, like where she smacks him with a mirror by accident and stuff like that, and then they go, and that scene only lasts for like 4 or 5 minutes, and they just go right back into another climax with the Nazis showing up in the submarine. So I did a lot of study of that movie and how they do stuff. So if you're writing an action movie, basically write Raiders of the Lost Ark.
You just like basically described something that in my edits for people, I find myself putting in every now and then. It's like, we really need a bridge here to connect what just happened to, you know, how this character essentially like feels about it, that segues into what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
a way that I do it a lot is I have my characters have a meal.
Huh.
Yeah, because you get them.
She's like, tell me more, because her characters are always eating.
Well, you learn so much when a bunch of people sit down at a table. You know what they like to eat, how they banter with each other. You know who does the cooking, who does the dishes. You know, you can learn a lot of fun things about your characters by doing that. And sometimes before I start writing a book, I'll actually write like a couple thousand words of my characters all sitting down having a meal. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll have the villains and everybody all at the table. You know, and I learn a lot about what the characters like and what they do, and it allows me to create all these character traits that then later on I can like still slip into the story, because now I know what they act like, I know what they think, you know, and stuff like that.
Yeah, that is true, because like you do kind of learn a little bit about people with watching them eat, like and how they behave, and they're just like, okay, how socially awkward am I going to be shoveling this stuff in my mouth?
And who's a dick to the waiter, you know, and who apologizes and stuff like that. You learn a lot.
This sounds like Thanksgiving 2019 or Thanksgiving 2020.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's a fun thing to write, actually, to write like all of your characters having a Thanksgiving meal together, like bring the villains in and everybody. You know?
Yeah, that's a good way to see what's going on behind the scenes with them and get them to reflect. Yeah. So you do need to have those moments in your chapter at the end of a chapter or start of the next one where the character's reflecting on what's happened and where they're at.
And something that I find that some writer, like because I work with a bunch of co-authors now, so we all kind of like learn a little bit from each other's styles and we see the things they do. And some writers really like the chapters have to be a certain length. You know, they plan all these chapters and they have to be a certain length. I have no idea what my chapter lengths are going to be. I have some chapters that are a page long. I have some chapters that are 25 pages long. Although I will break it up into scenes, because I really like, and actually as you approach the climax, your scenes should all be shorter. You should be making so you're cutting more and more and more and switching POVs and stuff like that. You don't want long drawn out chapters as you approach the climax. So you have to be switching POVs quickly and writing shorter scenes. But I don't have really any set amount of chapters. We give a book that has 25 chapters and is 100,000 words, and we give a book that's 90 chapters and is 70,000 words. Like it can really go both ways. It's really just it's whatever the characters are doing. You know, the characters and what they're going to do in any given situation defines to me the chapter length. There's no arbitrary length. And I find that some people, they're trying to write to all these word counts. They're like, well, the chapter's going to be 2,000 words long, you know, so I got to jam some more stuff in here. It's like, no, just stop doing it. And the other thing is start your scenes late and end them early.
Ooh, tell me more.
So I'm probably stealing that from someone because I've heard it repeated a bunch of times. But you know, like if you're going to have, like, say someone comes over to your house, and there's some sort of confrontation at the house, and then eventually, you know, one person leaves and another person leaves, and the police show up and take a statement, and then everybody else leaves. Well, start it after everybody gets there. Don't describe everybody entering one by one and what they're wearing, you know, or anything like that. So start it after everybody shows up, and end it right after like someone throws a punch or something like that, or maybe a little bit later, but end it like, well, there's still action going on. And then you can have the characters very quick, because you describe like all that ending stuff about how long it took before someone left and what someone said, and you know what the cop looked like when he showed up or something like that. You could spend like 4 or 5 pages doing all of that. But you could also cram that into maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs of dialogue in a future chapter, because dialogue is what you want, because dialogue tells you, instead of the narrator telling people what happened, it tells the reader what the characters think about what happened. Mm-hmm. And so you can then cram several pages into just a couple of lines of dialogue saying, well, you know, XYZ was a real douche canoe because they did XYZ and the cops had to show up, and well, wasn't that stupid, you know, and then they lied in their testimony. And now we've all got to go back to the station tomorrow or something like that. And you could sum up the whole thing like that and make everything move a lot faster. And then on top of that, like I said, get the characters' opinions about what they think about what happened.
So you could think about plot like events that happened in your character's day. And, you know, all these events happened. But if you do that, then you're going to end up telling the reader everything that happened. And a lot of that's going to be boring stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even want to think about my day. Most of my day is really boring. You know?
Yeah. So instead, if you think about the conflict that's central to the scene, you could ask yourself, when does the reader want to pick up at the start of that conflict? And then when's a good time to kind of chop it off and cut to the next scene? And then if there's information you need to know, you could put that into dialogue, or you could have a storytelling sentence that just sums up the boring bit and move on to the conflict part and the interesting part.
Exactly. And that's going to keep you from writing a lot of boring stuff. Because also when you're the author writing boring stuff, you're bored and you write slower and you stop writing, you know.
Exactly right.
So this lets you basically, because when I write a book, for me, I don't know what's happening next. I don't plot anything out. So for me, it's like watching a movie. I want to know what happens next too. And because of that, I don't want to deal with all these boring scenes because I want to know what the exciting thing is that happens. So it's a way I've developed of just, and actually it sort of came by accident when I first wrote my very first book. I just skipped over all the boring parts thinking I would write them again later. And I just never did. I read the book and I thought this is actually really good the way it is, and just went from there.
So we're talking about the saggy middle. And it sounds like one of the ways that an author can get into having a plot that's kind of sagging in the middle is if they're getting bored with their story, mm-hmm. or their story's kind of wandering around, or they're just including everything. But just to back up a little bit,
sure.
What does it mean to have a saggy middle?
Do we want to talk about an example of something that I think has a really saggy middle and how they could have fixed it?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I wasn't sure if we were doing that one or not. So I thought about movies and books and whatnot that have bad middles, and I wanted to find something that people would really know. And I think a movie that we all know that has a bad middle is Captain America: The First Avenger. And if I want to pick something, like, it's not the worst middle. I mean, there's obviously the movies with the worst middles we don't remember because we all stopped watching them. And they wouldn't make good examples because, only 4 people have seen them. But yeah, Captain America: The First Avenger has this great opening, right? It has this captivating opening where you meet this character and you really like him, and you meet Bucky and you meet, Stark and all that stuff. And it's really well done period piece. And the middle is a bunch of dancing, flashbacks and montages. And then you move on to the end, which is exciting again and feels more like he's fighting Cobra than someone from World War II. But aside from that, but the middle of that one is like, it is important stuff to move the movie along. But really what they tried to do is they tried to make something that they tried to put 2 movies into one, right? They tried to make an origin story that introduces you to Captain America and his band of brothers and whatnot, and why he went from just being a showman to actually being someone in combat. And then they dovetail that in with the whole Red Skull plot. And what you end up in the middle is you end up with all these characters that you end up meeting that are cool characters, but you barely even get to know them. And you only get to know them through these flashbacks and montages and stuff like that. And then at the end, you have to have had connect to them. And luckily, they had really good actors, and you were able to connect to all these side characters. But the middle of that movie really isn't that interesting. And they could have either one made it into 2 movies, although that's kind of hard to do in Hollywood because they always want the origin story and they want the big bad guy as well. Or they could have just said, you know what, we're just not going to put all these side characters into this movie, even though they're important in the comics. We just can't tell a good story with all these side characters. So I thought that would be, what is it? You're just like an elementary teacher? Sorry, I got distracted. Oh. So here's what
I'm talking to myself. I'm like saying stuff. I can't hear myself.
I'm supposed to have cat ears. Yeah, but let's go back to the point you were making.
Does it go away after a while? Is this going to stay up there forever?
No, she has to click it off. So, but that is actually a really good point. Because there's a lot of times that I find writers, when they're writing, it's like, oh, there's just all this stuff I need to put in here. So I'm just going to narrate, hey, this happened, then that happened, then here's a little bit of dialogue, but then that happened after this. And it's like literally in the narrative is XYZ happened. Here's some dialogue. And it's like, no. Write the scene. Give me all the dialogue. Yeah. Give me all the action that you planned in this, narrative 3 pages of I don't care anymore. Exactly. And give me the scene.
And in a movie like Captain America, they can get away with a little more because they can have it flashy and lots of big kabangs and stuff like that. But in a book, it's just like, let me tell you about the explosions. They're very exciting, It doesn't.
Let me paint you a picture of flashes.
Yeah, exactly.
So saggy middle is where the book's just starting to drag, where you feel like as an author, maybe you're getting a little lost, maybe you're getting a little bored. Perhaps you started out the book and you had a clear vision for this conflict. You had a clear vision for this plot. And you know where you're going to go in the end. Like you've got that climax in mind, but then you're halfway through your book and you're like, I've lost the plot here. And one of the ways you're saying that can happen is if there's just too many characters that are coming in, and you're not sure how they're all kind of connected?
Yeah, you're trying to introduce a bunch of different characters, and you want to, like if you got this big ensemble cast, and this can happen a lot, especially if you start out with a really focused story on like one character, like they did with Captain America. They're telling an origin story, so they zoom in on Captain America himself and maybe like one or two other people, and you spend like the first third of the movie only learning about Captain America, and then they have to like suddenly cram in this entire ensemble cast. I'm gonna put my hands back on the screen. Ensemble cast into the middle of the movie. And that can happen a lot in a lot of books too, where you want to like, you have this character, you want to get to know them, but maybe you put them on a starship and now you want to introduce the crew to the starship. So you just go and like send them on a bunch of short little missions or something like that. And that could be, it could be exciting. It could be boring depending on how you do it and what your vision is. And so sometimes that's where you need to decide, like, do I have too many characters, or am I trying to tell too much story in this one book? And I could go back to Raiders of the Lost Ark. They really carefully, gradually introduced more characters into that story and gave you a lot of time to get to know them. You got this hint about Belloc, who's one of the bad guys, and then you get lots of Indy time, and then you get Marion and Indy, and then you get, what's his name? I can't remember his name. The guy that John Rhys Davies played, who's like one of my favorite characters of all time. And that's really it. Like, there aren't a lot of other big characters in that show. They really kept it focused on just a small number of characters. Other than a couple of the Nazis, and they made them iconic, so they're very easy to recognize, like the guy with the round glasses and whatnot.
So, conflict. Know the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah.
Don't have 2 or 3 or 4 separate stories. Well, it depends on the book.
Depends on the book. Depends how long it's going to be, and so on.
But try to stay focused on that one story. Now, earlier you said you want to have multiple climaxes in your plot. How do you keep sight of that central story and still figure out ways to ramp up the tension, ramp up the stakes, and have multiple climaxes to your story?
Well, I think that the thing that you have to think about is whenever you're doing something, and if the story, so this is sort of the thing to think about, when the story's getting boring, it's probably because things are too easy for your characters right now. So what you need to do is you need to kick them in the balls and see what happens. I mean, and to be honest, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, it was kind of lame, because like, how many times does Marion get to get captured? Really? Because that's what they did in that movie. Marion just got captured over and over again. Was pretty much what they did to.
You definitely don't want to keep repeating a trouble, Yeah,
like, exactly.
Give them something new.
Yeah, but you got to think to yourself, like, what's the worst possible thing that could happen to my characters right now, and then do that. Like they're hanging out. They're on a starship. They dock to a space station because they need to, I don't know, get some weapons and meet a guy, and that's all that's going to happen there. It kind of has to happen because you said that was going to happen, and then they have to leave. And you're like, well, that's really kind of dull. Maybe they could get their ship could get impounded because someone it's got like a lien on it from some other system or something like that. They go to leave and it's impounded. Now they have to do something to get it free, or who knows? Like, smugglers show up because they've actually they actually dropped something inside of a crate, at a prior station, and now they're like trying to get this thing back that's on your ship. Like, think about like the worst thing that could happen to them at that time. That's reasonable. That doesn't seem contrived, obviously. And that could be a fun way. Like, then instead of them just like going to meet with a guy and get some intel to space station, now suddenly they got to go meet with this guy to get intel to space station. They got to refuel. They got to deal with the fact that smugglers think they've got something on their ship, and they just kidnapped the cook, when he went off to get supplies or something like that. Like, oh fuck, we gotta save the cook, so that sort of thing. And then you can get what could have been just like a simple scene or 2 scenes with like a meetup where they get some intel, to now trying to juggle all these things at once, and you could actually make it a pretty exciting scenario that you could put together. So it's always like that. Like, maybe not the worst thing, what's the most inconvenient thing that could happen to my characters right now, if you don't want to beat them up too much? And sometimes you can think of some crazy stuff. I personally try not to make it intra-character conflict. I write the A-Team. You guys watch the original A-Team, like the show from back in the 80s? And then, like, those 4 guys always had each other's back, even though they would bicker, and BA didn't want to fly and stuff like that. When push came to shove, they always had each other's back, and all of their conflict was minor. If they had any, it was just because BA didn't like Murdoch and some things like actually that was really just it. BA didn't like Murdoch. That's Baracus, not Bethany Ann, for anybody who might be confused there and suddenly wonder how she got an 8 on the A-Team. Do you guys know who Bethany Ann? You should give me Isaac blank stares. It's the main character in Michael Anderle's Kutherian series.
Oh.
Fail. It's terrible. All right, so
I'm sorry, my dog is barking so hardcore. I am just trying to hear you.
It's actually not super loud.
It's so loud to me. I'm sorry. I'm trying to focus. Okay, ignore me.
All right. Yeah, so I think I personally try not to create a lot of intra-character conflict because I want to write stories that are more entertainment focused. Although some readers really do like that internal conflict. They want to see the characters fighting with each other and having internal problems and whatnot. And you'll see a lot more of that in books. Actually, interestingly, in books that are aimed at women, you'll see a lot more internal conflict because women are much more interested in the intrapersonal relationships between people, whereas men just want to see stuff boom. That's obviously
you want all of the problems.
Yeah, and you like knowing like what makes people tick and why do they think the way they think, and you learn a lot about that by creating these interpersonal conflicts. It's tricky not to make them contrived though, and that's one of the things that I have is if you got like sort of like and this goes back to the 18, they were like a band of brothers scenario. They've been through thick and thin to the point where they're not going to get upset about if someone squeezes the toothpaste from the wrong end. Like when someone saves your life 17 times, you can let the toothpaste slide. So you have to be careful about that if you are going to write characters that have been through thick and thin together, that you don't create too much internal conflict, because typically that happens less with people that are really well bonded together. Unless you can come with a scenario where they're just like, you might have saved my life 17 times, but I still hate your guts. I'm going to punch you in the face every time I see you. Like that.
But you need to make that really clear.
You can't. You have to really make it so that you start that from the beginning and you build it up carefully, that these two characters kind of dislike each other. And they did that actually with Murdoch and BA, because BA would just punch him in the face every now and then. Well, no, it was 80s television. I don't think anyone got punched in the face.
Just reminded him a little bit.
Yeah. Exactly.
Or that time you skinned me alive.
You clearly need to watch A-Team again.
I probably do. Because, anyway, no, that's going to segue way too far off into nowhere. Before we continue on to our next part, though, we do have a delightful show sponsor brought to you by Echoes of Valor by Josh Hayes. Woo-hoo. Let me scroll a little bit so I can actually see all my words, all of them. Okay, here we go. The truth is out there. In the aftermath of the Stonemaier disaster, Special Agent Jackson Fisher is determined to uncover truth behind the failed mission and bring those responsible to justice. But growing pressure to close the case has everyone on edge, and Fisher is desperate for more evidence. As Corporal Alan Sheridan struggles to face his demons from Stonemaier, he must also prove himself to his new teammates. Assigned to the Alliance Marine Special Operation Command, Sheridan and the members of Team Valkyrie soon find themselves right in the middle of the biggest clandestine operation in the history of the Alliance. The search for truth, however, only leads to more questions, and with the Alliance on the brink of war, Fisher and Sheridan must race against the clock to find the answers that will put an end to the conspiracy that threatens to tear the Alliance apart. Echoes of Valor is an action-packed story of bravery, determination, and the will to win at all costs. With higher stakes and deeper mysteries, the second book in the Valor series will keep you turning the pages to the very end of doom.
Yeah.
Was that actually in there? End of doom?
No, he just always puts doom on everything, so I figure probably should put it on his book at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone check. It does not say doom. Okay.
I didn't even think of that. That's hilarious. It's just fun to say, but yeah, definitely put it on Josh Hayes' book.
It works. I mean, this time it actually worked to the very end of doom.
I want you to read my book blurbs for now. I'm just going to have like just you reading them.
Yes.
Loving it.
All right. So to keep our plots from sagging too much, we want to keep our eyes on what the central conflict is, know what our story is, and not throw off so many characters into the story, not have too much going on in our plot. To be excited about the story, to be excited about the plot. Are there any other ways that our stories can be sagging?
I suppose, if nothing's happening, that could be sagging. I think some of the things that can be some people like them and some people don't. Some people see flashbacks as boring. Just the way they so you can find people who love flashbacks, you can find people who absolutely hate flashbacks. So it can be a safe thing to do to not write flashbacks if you can get away with it. In AM 14, we have one book with heavy flashbacks, and it receives a lot of review hate for having those, even though I think we executed it really well. It causes some people just, as they're reading, to be invested in one thing and then suddenly jump into something completely different. And for whatever reason, you would think you get the same thing from a POV switch, but flashbacks seem to cause some special angst with readers, and then some people actually skip over them. Like, I can't believe
it's almost like, I'm going forward. Why did you not put this before I'm already where I'm at?
Yeah.
Just, yeah.
So that can
it's like, the writer just forgot to put this scene in, so the character's going to remember it now.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's hard. Like, sometimes if you it's like what I was mentioning before, if you're trying to introduce a lot of characters in the second act, sometimes flashbacks can be useful for that, but they're still kind of a crutch in a way, and they can cause they can cause your middle to become saggy just from that, because unless your flashback has its own sort of mini climax in that flashback, it's going to be kind of boring. So if you do a flashback, it actually needs to be sort of almost like a short story with its own beginning, middle, and end.
We can't all be Sherlock.
Not all the time, at least.
Sorry, I love the Sherlock little flashback scenes where he's imagining everything, and anyway, but we can't all do it.
I don't remember what those are now. Are we talking about the new series, the BBC one? Well, I guess they're all BBC.
I don't know. I love the way he thinks and how they show it. So, anyway.
So if you needed to communicate information that's in a flashback, but you didn't want to put a flashback in there, how could you do that?
I mean, one other way to do it is just have the characters bitch and moan about something. That's actually one of my favorite ways to relay dialogue, is to have characters complain at each other about stuff. For my world, I have a lot of heavy world building that I've done. Like, I have a very complex universe, a lot of stuff going on, and rather than laying in a lot of narrative, which I guess is another way to make any part of your book saggy, not just the middle, I have characters just complain. Like instead of saying like, oh, there's this planet with XYZ, and that's where you get this particular resource and it's important, someone can say, oh, we're going back there again. Last time we were there, you screwed up, and then we had to do this thing and that thing to figure it all out. And if we're going to go again,
that devil plant makes me sneeze.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And stuff like that. I usually like to say, like, when we went there, we had the unfortunate orgy, or something like that. You're going to add some humor to it. And you're like, what's the unfortunate orgy? Tell me more.
Did we miss that? What's in that? Where's that book at?
But yeah, so you could, I find, and that the fun thing too is I find that readers really like characters who are mildly sarcastic with one another. It just adds some good humor into the story. So I like to do a lot with that. Is my characters will a lot of my backstory and things that could be flashbacks will actually come from that. And sometimes I do write those stories.
Nice.
My very first book, the first one I wrote, is the fourth one I published. The characters talk about going to the Disney World. And I realized that after actually going to Disney World, I'm like, eventually Disney's going to have a planet. Like, let's be honest. They're going to get a whole freaking planet.
Dude, they're a country right now. They're on their way.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, yeah, they're going to own like Indonesia at some point or something like that. It's like, this is an island. We got the whole thing. But eventually they're going to have a planet, obviously. So you go to the Disney World, when everybody's modded into elves and stuff like that or whatever. So it was like mentioned in passing as like a punishment. We're going to send you to the Disney World. And then so I actually then wrote a series of short stories actually take place on the Disney World.
Oh God, I just had like a mind blast of, it's like some kind of, like, it was the Disney World and then zombies took over and now it's like, it's a small world. They're just
an unfortunate accident happens where someone gets turned into a vampire and the vampire bites the Red Queen's cards, and then they have the dark forest is filled with Red Queen card vampires, and they have to like send in a crew of dwarves to go clean them out. So that stuff does happen in the Disney World.
There you go.
So you can take that idea and just kind of run with it when
back on target, track again.
Yeah, sorry, my brain's all over the place today. I'm going to try not to keep doing that.
So I think where we wanted to go next do you have any great tips for breaking through that saggy middle? I know we've heard a lot of them already, but any others?
I mean, yeah, I guess like the biggest one is just don't write it. Figure out a way to skip it, I think, is one of the biggest ways. And then my other big one is just doing something terribly unfortunate to my characters. I thought of more and now I can't remember them. So maybe we should look at the ones that we had noted and we can talk about those.
All right. Well, we found a blog post from nownovel.com called Writing the Middle of the Novel, 9 Tips to Keep Moving. And their top tip was to change locations for new developments and changes. They said the 5 W's of the story, where, what, why, who, and when, can all change to create variety and interest. None of these elements must change. The characters in your novel or setting can remain fairly constant, yet change opens up possibilities for new developments and intriguing new scenarios. These keep your novel exciting and interesting. In David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas, each section of the book changes location, from the Chatham Islands just off New Zealand to a futuristic imaginary state in Korea. The central section of the book, however, is set in a post-apocalyptic society. The setting of this section is gradually revealed as we piece together clues from narration and dialogue about its history. Though the change in both aspects of setting, time and place, Mitchell adds mystery through the change. The middle considerably expands the many unknowns of the story wanting resolution. So to avoid your story stagnating in a single location, try shifting somewhere new, another town or country, from the city to the countryside or vice versa. Make sure any change of setting makes sense in relation to the preceding plot. So what do you think about that tip?
I think that's actually, to be honest, it's probably one of the ones that authors use a lot. We do with swapping to a different POV with another set of characters. And a lot of times, I think, I'm surprised I didn't think of this before. My wig must be too tight. But yeah, like a lot of times when you're bored in a story, you just start writing a new POV with a new character in a new spot. I mean, George R. R. Martin did this all the time. All the time, George. Too often you did this.
And then he killed him.
He has like an individual book that's longer than the entire Lord of the Rings, and nothing happens. Like, it's crazy. Sorry, drag on George R. R. Martin time. But yeah, actually, to go back to my seminal example, if you look at Raiders of the Lost Ark, almost every single scene happens in a different place. You start off in the Colombian jungle, then you're at university in Indiana, I think is in Chicago, then you're in Nepal, then you're in Egypt. I guess there's a couple parts in Egypt, and then you're on a boat, then you're on a submarine, then you're on an island, like almost every part of that movie does move to a whole new locale pretty quickly, actually, which is kind of neat. And they skip the boring part by just showing the airplane, going over the map. So.
Yeah, I do want to, because I know there's bound to be somebody out there that's like, but my whole story is a ghost story and they're just trapped in this one house. I can't have them skip to different areas. Well, yes, you can if you focus on the rooms. They could be upstairs. The hallway becomes a new place. That creepy bathroom down the hall, going down the stairs, down in the kitchen, the living room, out in the backyard. All of those are new areas.
The movie Clue is a really good example of that. How they did that in Clue. Like everything is about like these rooms that have like their own personality. They're constantly rushing between the rooms, the whole cast goes from one room to the next and everything. That's great, yeah.
Even the small scale scenery has its own intermixed places that you can focus on.
Totally.
All right, Kaylee, you want to read for us the next one?
Yes, I can. If my little mouse here will cooperate with me. All right, here we go. Number 2 is use the middle to raise uncertainty about your character's goals. In the first third of your novel, you introduce pivotal characters and their goals. For example, in Tolkien's The Fellowship of the Ring, it's quickly established that the protagonist Frodo must go on a quest. He's tasked with taking an inherited artifact, the powerful One Ring, away from his homeland, the Shire. Yet towards the middle of the book, tension mounts. Frodo faces the novel's antagonists, henchmen, treacherous terrain, and more. Using the middle to increase uncertainty about characters' outcomes applies for diverse genres. In a romance, the middle is often where 2 characters pull or are driven apart. In Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, for example, the protagonist Elizabeth Bennet visits her friend Charlotte in Kent around the middle of the story. Lizzie is invited to the home of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who is incidentally also the aunt of her eventual love interest, Mr. Darcy. There are misunderstandings between Elizabeth and Darcy, who proposes to her with unfortunate timing. He expresses doubts about the differences in status between their families, which in turn intensifies Elizabeth's temporary dislike of Darcy. As Austen does, use the middle of your novel to make the likeliest outcome encounter new complications.
This is the kick them in the balls whenever you can.
Yep.
Right.
It's like, I'm going to pick this flower, and then a snake pops out and bites him. Something.
Yeah, find ways to ratchet up that tension.
Yeah.
And in particular, think about what your character really needs, not what they want, what they need, and what kind of person they're going to be at the end, you intend to be, and how can you get them there? How can you push them and pull them until they get there?
My characters just want to be alive at the end.
There you go. Okay.
Please don't kill me. I'm sorry. I'll fly better, Mr. Cooper. I'll fly better. Sorry.
So how can we complicate that?
Oh, well, I mean, my default actually, if things are dull, someone just gets shot in the head, you know. That happens a lot. Well, they usually don't get shot in the head. They're kind of permanent, but they'll get shot somewhere.
I just had this voice. You bore me now.
Or Willow ripping the skin off. Was she like bored now? I forget what that was. That was weak. Yeah, my main character is this running gag right now. I think she's on her 13th heart because she's been shot so many times.
Goodness.
Yeah. So.
All right. Our next one goes with the last one: increase plot complications and character obstacles. When writing the middle of a novel, use a turn of events or sudden setback to add dramatic tension and suspense. Readers become less certain characters will get the outcomes their opening chapters suggest. And you brought up George R.R. Martin. He says, let's just make this super uncertain and actually allow them to die. In a lot of books, the main character doesn't die halfway through the novel, but then there's the Song of Ice and Fire. Did I get that title right?
Yep.
Yeah,
everybody dies.
And our favorite main character from the start dies. Yes.
Yep. And by book 4, everyone you care about is dead, so you stop reading.
Well,
be careful who you choose to whack off.
That's actually true. I read the first 2, and then first 3, and then after that I went to Wikipedia and I did read the synopsis because I was so upset that my favorite characters kept dying on me.
I can't love anyone. What's the point of reading this anymore?
I do think that whack off probably is not what we want.
I probably should have just said whack. Y'all know what I mean. My wig is also tight.
It's a good excuse.
It is. I actually took ibuprofen to combat the headache I knew would be coming. Anyway.
I had to take this wig and I had to cut a bunch of the stuff in the back. Otherwise, it just was too small. So all these elastics in the back, I just cut them all. So.
Oh, I should have did that. Anyway, no, that's going to totally go off topic.
So those are the complications you guys are experiencing in the middle of this podcast. But if you're asking yourself about your book, what complications could I throw at my characters? This blog post suggests misunderstandings between characters. That's especially great for romances and drama.
Love triangle.
Yes, love triangles. Yeah, that could be a complication, right? Another woman or another man. Unexpected physical obstacles. So like a quest, you need to find a different route on your quest. Discoveries that change characters' understandings or goals. For example, in Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth's gradual realization that Darcy is a finer person than she originally thought, and that she was the one with Pride and Prejudice when she thought it was all him.
Bummer.
Yeah, you definitely got to push your characters to, the situations that you have in your own life. It's like, I could make a decision to go left or right. If I go left, God, this is going to happen. If I go right, it's going to happen. But which one am I going to be most comfortable with? And that will say a lot about who your character is. Do they let all the children on the bus die to go save Johnny Rocket, or do they go save all the children and let Johnny Rocket die?
Yeah. And I think one of the ways to sort of identify when you're in these situations where you should be doing that is when you start to feel like your character is just in easy mode. Like you've got like a list of things you need them to do, and you're just writing through the list of things they need to do, and they're not experiencing any complications or anything like that. And it's like, and then that's part of the reason why it's boring, because like nothing's happening. You just have to write this list of steps that they need to follow. And that's why you need to do stuff. Yeah, like where the bus, Johnny, they got to save the kids or Johnny Rocket. They got to make the choice.
I like the point they make about a realization that changes everything. That's not something that that's not an idea that comes to me naturally when I'm putting my plot together. Like what could I introduce that would change or transform everything that's come before? It's kind of cool.
I mean, one of these ways that could happen is my wife Jill, who writes in Aeon 14 as Chris J. Pike, is a lot better at that sort of thing than I am. She loves internal conflict with her characters, and she has to like try and find a balance with the space opera books because our readers are a little bit less interested in that. But in one of our books, the whole point for the characters until about halfway through the book is they're supposed to rescue this girl and bring her back to her father. And halfway through some complications they run into, they realize that actually that's the wrong move, and they have to rescue her and keep her away from her father instead. And so all of their goals change, and suddenly all of their allies become enemies, and their enemies stay enemies, which makes it even harder. So that could be an interesting way to do it, is actually take the actual thing the characters that you said the characters are going to do at the beginning and have them have to do something else.
Wow, I like that.
I do really like that as well. You put a giant monkey wrench in the machine, but you're building a new machine. So
yeah, and instead of it sort of just being like a contrived thing where it's like, oh, they have to deal with this thing and go on with the plot as planned. Nope, it's now we're actually doing the other thing. And you don't see that a lot in most movies or books, because it's I mean, I guess George R.R. Martin kind of does it. He just kills the person, so they're not doing anything anymore.
Wow, that's one of those plot points that you can plan, or if you're a pantser, that's one that can kind of hit you in the middle of it, and you look at the book that's come before and you go, wow, my subconscious was somehow planning this. I wasn't thinking it, but it just kind of came out, and it just seems so perfect.
Oh, and for any of you writers out there that has happened to, you're halfway through a book and you're like, God, but it's going to a completely different ending. That is okay. You can keep the 40, 50, 70,000 words you've written before. Just make sure it makes sense that where they're going next follows through.
What I do when I run into that sort of thing is like I write my book once and I do like a second pass where I run over it in it only takes me about 2 to 3 days to do a full run through. So what a lot of times I'll do is usually I have like one of those epiphanies around the 70% mark, and I'll do one of two things. One, I'll just write it as though I'd been that smart from the beginning and just kind of carry on. But sometimes I'll actually stop there and I'll do my second pass up to that point. And then I'll go forward with all the nuance in. So it usually doesn't actually throw as much of a time monkey wrench in as one would think. Because in theory, you go over your book at least a second time anyway, and you can square away any plot points that you need to.
Awesome. All right, next point. This is one that we've kind of talked about already a little bit, is create subplots that add interest to your main story arc. Subplots are useful for making your main story arc more interesting, especially in the middle of a novel. They can give characters the knowledge or skill they need to achieve an aim. For example, in J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, there are plenty of subplots within each novel. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, the main arc involves Harry confronting what lies in the secret chamber of the title. In a subplot towards the middle of the novel, Harry and his friends venture into the forbidden forest that surrounds their magic school. They do this to understand why spiders are fleeing the school for the forest following a series of deadly attacks in the school grounds. They find an enormous spider in the forest named Aragog. The spider gives them vital clues to understanding what lies in the Chamber of Secrets. Like Rowling's subplots, the subplots in your novel, in the middle, should give characters what they need to progress further towards their goals. Harry and his friends can only stop the mysterious attacks by following another lead first. This first lead and its minor arc initially seem unrelated to the main story arc, the unsettling mass migration of spiders. There are thus multiple levels of narrative uncertainty and tension. Thus, we need multiple answers. So we've got these subplots, but they seem to be working together for the main story arc.
That's something that I think when we were talking a little bit about the show and what we would talk about, there's a thing where a lot of writers, and I brought this mentioned before, where they're trying to write a certain number of words. You know, you're trying to write, my chapter has to be a certain length, my book has to be a certain length, and that will cause you to start slapping in filler. What I typically try to do is I just try to write to the end, and I don't worry about the length of the story. But then what I'll do is I'll say, okay, you know, this one came in at 50K, and obviously I need to have a longer story than 50K. So I'll look back at the story and I might say, okay, at point XYZ, they needed to get a certain AI, because the AI knew a thing that they need to know. So then what I might do is I actually might introduce, I think I'm going to the next one, they might introduce a minor character who actually is the person who has the AI, and then they have to get the AI from that person rather than just grabbing it from somewhere convenient. And that's one of the ways you can actually write all the way to your end of your book and then add in these things later on, if you need to have a certain word count. And then you don't have to worry about just sort of like, making meals longer, or talking about someone entering the bridge for 5 minutes or something like that. You can just keep the pace moving and then layer in those other things later. And that sometimes might give you the ability to swap between POVs as well, which can make things feel like they're moving faster to the reader.
Okay, so take a look at that central plot and figure out how you can add a little more depth to it.
Yep.
One way to do that would be to introduce a cool new character who relates and then can bring a new angle onto your story.
Yeah. And actually, one thing that just came to mind, I don't know if anything else talks about this, but you can actually make your book seem longer or shorter by telling the reader that something took a really long time. There's narrative tricks that you can do, and they may bite you in the ass. You have to be careful. But if you actually describe, like you take like a page to describe something that took a really long time and it was arduous and hard and everybody was depressed and sad, it took forever. The reader, it will feel to the reader like it took a really long time to get through that chapter. There's actually some tricks you can do for that. So if you find that you're at a point in your story where things are kind of saggy, try not to do that, because it will actually make the book seem like it took longer. And then conversely, you can actually tell the reader things are happening fast, and it'll actually feel like things are happening fast in your story. So you can actually do both of those things to sort of like manufacture pacing.
Yeah, those are all really good point. At the end of the day, like your verbiage, like the types of words that you are choosing to use really do impact your story on a level that you may not realize that they are. You're developing an emotional connection to each scene that's happening. And yeah.
I did this in one of my books. I did this part where I really wanted to make it feel like the characters were alone and lost in the spaceship for a really long time. And it was arduous and hard. And they were like tired and bored and frustrated and whatnot. And it was only like 5 or 6% of the book. And people were like, wow, that was so much of the book. It took forever for this to happen. It's like, actually, it was a tiny part of the book. And I guess I did it too well. Whoops.
It was just this.
Yes, it was like literally like two, like not even 2 full chapters in this novel where that happened. And it's the one part be like, oh my God, this novel was so slow. And they always talked about this one part. I'm like, okay, I guess that was a little bit too much.
My bad.
I basically made a saggy middle on purpose by accident, sort of.
But the good news there is if you've got a lot of time in your cover, but that part's kind of boring, just a couple sentences, you can storytell and then move on to the cool, exciting part. So that's one way to get around it.
And I like this idea of like introducing the minor characters, because I am also one of those people when I have a character, I'm instantly like, backstory. Not necessarily that's going to go into the book, but it's like I know all this stuff about the character itself. But like you were saying, they need to go get an AI. But Dude Face has an AI. It's like, oh, you don't want to go deal with him. He's a nasty character. Well, we need to go deal with him. Oh, but you don't understand. He's fortified, man. He's fortified. And then they got to fight fortification. It's just like, it's so much better than being like, could we please purchase this AI for 400 credits? It's way more interesting. So I love that. And you can do that for like anything. It's great.
Yep. And you can backfill that into your story. So you don't have to worry about it while you're writing it, trying to figure out a word count, deal with the word count issue. There'll be places in your story where you could go back and add these complications if you need to. And yeah, I agree with you, Rick. The second half of Two Towers felt like it took 1,000 years to read, because it's just so much walking through the swamp.
He walked and he walked some more slowly, arduously, and it's stuck. Oh, how it's stuck.
I think it was actually a relatively short part of the story. Yeah, I think it was just like it took a really long time. It's like it's taking so long to read.
Right, so, here's a good one that I need to put into my brain meats when I'm doing these shows and I have 1,000 things going on around me. Number 6, stay focused on your character's end goals. So my end goal is to not go off topic of the topic of the show. I'm freaking host, supposed to stay on topic.
You're doing great. Keep going.
But what this blog post is saying is, oh my God, my hair. One cause for a mushy middle in a novel is the sense of direction and purpose disappearing. Often beginning authors in particular will add scenes to the middle that show relationships between characters. Okay, that's not really baby. Yeah. But don't suggest how these relationships are relevant to broader story arcs. The crucial task in the middle of your novel is to connect. If your main character heads out to see friends and they engage in fun dialogue and banter, relate this dialogue and banter to approaching scenes and developments in your story. And I hope I am understanding this correctly. I love pulling past things or past things that I actually didn't write into current scenes. So if X and X is happening, it's like, oh God, do you remember like back when we were in those woods that one time and that crazy thing came out and you just like karate chopped the heck out of it? And the guy's like, I don't want to talk about that. We said we weren't going to talk about that, but we need to talk about it now. Guys, can we focus on the mission? You know, it's just, it creates, I love that kind of stuff. So
that's the best. Yep. Yeah. My stories, it's always about places they can't go because Cheeky's going to want to have sex with everybody there. Cheeky's the pilot in the starship and she's an nymphomaniac. No, we can't go there because Cheeky's going to bang everybody. So I remember last time she went there, she banged that guy. Yeah, that's my version of that.
That's funny.
And usually it ties to the plot. Usually, not always. Usually,
it's like, guys, I'll behave myself. Maybe. All right. So, yeah, so that's really good. And building to a smaller peak, number 7. I'm trying really hard to stay focused.
That's kind of what we talked a lot about, is having multiple climaxes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is what everybody wants, more than one climax. Sorry, accidental euphemism.
She's saying in this blog article that you can have a false climax before the major one. So you know that you're going to build your protagonist and antagonist to have this final showdown scene towards the end of the novel. Before then, you could have the two of them confront each other, but our main character fails.
Yeah. Well, I think a perfect example of a false climax is when Indy manages to get the Ark away from the Nazis in Egypt. You know, he fights the big guy and the guy hits the propeller on the plane. He gets turned into soup, you know, and he gets the Ark and he takes off and he leaves. And you think, wow, Indy's like done it. He's got the Ark, you know. And they have that scene with the loading on the boat and John Rhys Davies is like, I'm the monarch of the sea. And you think, oh, the movie's done. Hooray. And it's not done. Like that was a pretend climax. And the real one where the Nazis melt is coming later.
Rick is being naughty in the chat.
You have to watch out watching you mac off. Yep. But so that's an example of how you can do it. You can, and that movie, I feel like a lot of us really felt like, you know, that whole scene with finding the Ark and whatnot in Egypt was the climax, and it wasn't. It was a great semi-climax, but it wasn't the climax.
But when you do that, it leaves your reader thinking, wow, that was a lot of fun. That was exciting, but that wasn't the final thing. Yeah. So what's the final showdown going to be? So it builds anticipation to getting to that really cool final showdown.
It does.
And this 8th one, which actually, you know, Frisbee and I are actually talking about with MLO, because our first act is like X amount of words. Our second act is like woof, this beef monster, and then we have our ending.
Is that another euphemism?
Oh God. I did again, didn't I? I'm sorry. I'm not doing it on purpose. Stop it. All right. Shorten the middle and move to the resolution sooner. So another reason why some books feel directionless is the middle is that authors spend long on the middle while developing the story. The middle section of your book, however, can be as short as a few chapters. Maybe our Act 2 really isn't as long as we think. Anyway, if it feels that the middle of your book drags and loses pace, don't be afraid to trim it down so that your story flows better to its ultimate conclusion. If you introduce subplots in the middle, ask yourself, how does this propel the story further? How will the scene further my story's sense of cause and effect? Which, yeah, is another like great point is, you know, you definitely want to add in like all the threads. But if they're major threads that aren't going to go anywhere, then, you know, get rid of them. Yeah, just kill the bastards.
Or turn them into a short story.
There you go.
Yeah.
I hate throwing away words. I do think I did that in one of my first novels. I had this whole scene where I introduced this minor character. Or sorry, it was actually 3 chapters worth. And it really wasn't necessary. So I just took it out and I just made it a short story that I gave people to join my mailing list afterward. So it was a good use of words I'd already written.
But it also doesn't sag the book that you're in.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It actually, because it was actually a whole section of like nothing really happening, so that all just left and ta-da, went from climax to climax again.
Which is what all of us authors want. Multiple climaxes.
Multiple climaxes.
Need it. Gotta have it. Because it keeps the readers happy. And that is always our goal.
Yeah. Keeps the KU reads going in. And
everyone's happy.
I feel like we really just moved into like 100% euphemisms here.
I just, you know what? I said, screw it. Just do it. Let's just get her done. Let's just get on with it. All right. Mal, holy Moses on toast. Thank you so much for coming in and just being awesome. Do you have any last minute tips, tricks, and all the shenanigans that you can stuff in?
I just love holy Moses on toast. That's like, I've never heard that before. I'm using that in the future.
Yay! I say it a lot.
I think, I guess the one thing is I kind of got at this about the meal is you can find ways to have, these are great ways for you to get to know your characters and your readers to get to know the characters, is have minor sort of pseudo conflict things between your characters. Like I do card games with my characters a lot. And meals and whatnot. Those are great ways to spice up a middle. And the neat thing you can do too is you can use them to fill in time passage, because a lot of times the reason why you have a saggy middle is you're like, okay, well, XYZ happened here and the climax is like a month later. What do I do for the month in the middle? So you could write a couple of really, really quick, sharp scenes, like a meal, a card game, going out in the town, and then, or you could do one of the things where they need to get a thing and you make it more complicated. And those are ways you can fill that time. But don't write that whole month in between, like the beginning and the end of your movie. Show like a couple like snapshots of things that are happening along the way, and don't write anything else. I think that's probably the biggest reason why a lot of authors will have a saggy meal, is because you write, like the beginning is very intense. So it's maybe like, it could be like, 100 pages of like one day. And then a lot of times after that, you end up with this scenario where you have to cover weeks or something like that. And you find yourself writing like every day of those couple of weeks. That's just boring.
And he ate cereal, and he went back for milk because he ran out of milk for his cereal.
And he walked across the swamp and walked across the swamp some more.
And that same dog crossed 3 days prior.
Yeah. Yeah, so like find something exciting that happened in the middle of all of that, write that one thing, and then move on to the end, which I think is what that last point was really saying, is just shorten the middle and only like write like a little bit of it.
I think that applies to more than just the middle.
That's right. That's true. Put your whole book in a corset.
Strap it all in.
Yeah, you're right. You do see a lot of authors do too much world building at the beginning of the book. They're telling you all about the world. And my first couple of books, when I wrote, I just took all that out. I wrote all this world building stuff and I removed it from the book and I turned it all into dialogue later on.
There you go.
There's almost no narrative world building at all. It's all just the characters bitching about stuff at each other.
I have noticed the more I write, my stronger stories have a majority on dialogue.
Yeah.
You really get into the character's head. But I still, do my narratives. I have my specific points and parts that I just that's just how I write. I have to have this part with stuff that says this. But I have been adding a lot more dialogue than I used to. And I think my stories are stronger because of it. So
yeah.
I would agree.
I have some chapters I write that are almost they're like 90% dialogue. And then I come through in a second pass and I add more setting. I'm like, oh crap, I need to tell them where they are.
You need to add some bits here and there.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. The reader might want to know that they're in the middle of an office building when they're talking about all this stuff, because I didn't mention that,
All right. There was a fire. I probably should add smoke.
Exactly.
Whatever have you. All right. Well, okay. I don't want to say goodbye, but we have to say goodbye because it is that time. So long, farewell to you, my friends. If any of you who know where that is from, you are awesome. All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on our show. Can you remind our our listeners, our viewers, all that, where they can find you?
Sure. Well, you can find my books on aeon14.com. That's AEON14.com. You can look me up on Facebook, MD Cooper. And if you're interested in my book on my book on Facebook ads, and I have an upcoming book on launches that includes worksheets, and all sorts of stuff that tells you what to do when, based on the type of launches you want to do. And I'm writing one on marketing tactics as well. All of that you can just search for Mal Cooper, M-A-L Cooper, and you'll find all of that on Amazon as well.
All right, you heard it here, and it has been a great show. Make sure you come back next week to check out all of the shenanigans, Mondays and Thursdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Mountain, where we're going to talk about reading, writing, and everything in between, right here on Keystroke Mediums, The Writer's Journey. Good night, guys.
Night.
Bye.